there, and welcome to the Transparently Jordan podcast, where I'll be talking with a new guest each week, and we'll be covering topics in health, fitness, lifestyle, and so much more. So stick around and let's get into today's episode.
I realized how fragile your health can be. It's like, boom, something big can happen quite quickly. So even if you aren't diabetic, even if you don't have something like that to deal with, realize that you should appreciate your health big time. I know it's such a cliche thing to say, but it's true. It's like when I noticed that it's just boom, like that massive change. You appreciate then your family's health, your friends' health.
Hello there. How are you? Welcome to another episode. I don't have a lot to say today, so this may be a very quick intro. Probably one of the quickest ones I've ever had. I have not been doing anything because it is exam season for us right now. I am in my final examination period, so all I have been doing is studying and doing a whole lot of nothing, which I know is so boring. It's unlike me. I usually have like half an hour worth of content to tell you all during the beginning, but today I have nothing. So my weekly recap has, I have nothing, but what I want to share with you is my book that I read this week. So I finished the Are You Sleeping book, which I mentioned last week. This book, if you have watched on Apple TV, the show, I don't remember what the TV show was, but it was about this podcaster who re-looked at a closed case. So essentially, that show was based off of this book. It's titled something different on the show. The show is completely different in the sense that it follows the podcaster and kind of everybody, as well as, you know, the two sisters, Warren, who is in jail. It just follows everybody, whereas the book is from the point of view of Josie, whom is one of the sisters. So anyways, I finished the book, and it was one of those books that, you know, you just can't put down. So I think I finished in like 2 days. I think it's only like 350 pages long, but super suspenseful book. It's actually very interesting for me to have read this book after watching the entire series on Apple TV, because again, you just kind of got, the book was based off of Josie's point of view, and all of you listening that have no idea what I'm talking about or whom I'm talking about, I apologize, but maybe go watch this series or read this book and you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just super suspenseful, and again, it's just about Warren Cave, whom was imprisoned and found guilty of killing Josie and Lainey's father. So it is essentially based on Josie and Lainey, and this other character named Poppy Parnell is a podcaster, and she basically starts this podcast and brings up the question, is Warren Cave actually guilty? So it's just an interesting book because at the end of every chapter, it has like a bunch of tweets or a bunch of like Reddit posts, or it has the actual like transcript of the podcast episode, and it's just very well done in that sense. So super interesting book. I definitely recommend you reading it. I know I probably didn't do it justice, me explaining it, but definitely recommend that. Now, actually, I do have something that I want to talk about during this episode, something that is super exciting for me and something that I've been so stressed about the last couple months. I think I mentioned this a few episodes ago, and I kind of briefly mentioned it, but I am officially allowed to say a lot more about this new project, so I'm going to tell you all about it now. And that is, I have a brand new show coming out. So this new show, this new podcast is going to be coming out in hopefully about a month. So I am aiming currently for the end of April. Now, this new podcast is going to be absolutely nothing like the Transparently Jordan podcast. So if you are listening to this podcast now and you're like, oh, is this new podcast going to be similar, different? What's it going to be about? It's going to be completely different. It is not going to be in the health, fitness, and lifestyle kind of category. This new podcast is called Are You Sleeping? Now, this new podcast that I shouldn't really say is new, because in my head, Are You Sleeping? The podcast is actually a podcast that I wanted to start even before the Transparently Jordan podcast. It was an idea that I wanted to start before this current podcast that you're listening to. Unfortunately, though, this podcast, Are You Sleeping, is a lot more work than the Transparently Jordan podcast. Not to say that the Transparently Jordan podcast isn't a lot of work. It is a lot of work finding guests, coming up with the content, and it's a lot. But this new podcast, I have to do a lot of research. I have to do a lot of script writing and this and that. So it is going to be completely different. And essentially, yeah, I just feel like I have a little bit more time for the rest of the year. I'm going to be on placement. So, I mean, placement is a lot of work, but I don't know. I feel like I'm not going to be studying as much. So, hopefully, I can be using my off time for this project. So, Are You Sleeping? The podcast. I am not sure what the whole logistics of the date the new episodes are going to be out and this and that, but I can say that I do have the trailer for the podcast. I shouldn't even say trailer, it's kind of like the introduction to every episode that I am going to share with you all right now. Ooh. So, if you have not guessed from that little clip there, this new podcast is nothing like this current one. It is going to be a horror story podcast. So, essentially, on this podcast, I am going to be covering a new story each week. A new story about a haunting, about paranormal activity, I think that's the word, paranormal activity or supernatural activity. And it is just going to be a brand new story every week. So I hope you all are excited. And I mean, maybe not all of you, only the ones that are into that horror stuff like me. So yeah, that is the new podcast. But let's get into today's episode. Now, today's episode is going to be another brand new topic. So, today's episode is covering a topic that I absolutely have no knowledge about before I did this interview, actually. I know a lot more now. This podcast episode is going to be on type 1 diabetes. So, of course, you are in this podcast, or you've clicked on it because you know from the title it is about type 1 diabetes. And essentially what we are going to be doing today is covering training with type 1 diabetes, what type 1 diabetes is. If you are out there listening and you are a healthcare practitioner, you are a personal trainer, and you have clients or have had clients in the past who have had type 1 diabetes, you may learn a tip or a trick or two around this in this episode. Oh my God, I can't talk today. You may learn a tip or trick in today's episode about how you can better tailor your services to someone with type 1 diabetes. So today I am chatting with Eoin, whom is super knowledgeable in this topic, of course. He is someone who has type 1 diabetes himself and who has basically based his entire business around type 1 diabetes. So, of course, somebody who has type 1 diabetes himself and is a personal trainer and has a business. Of course, I want to have him on the podcast because I wanted to interview somebody who has a lot more knowledge than I do on this topic. I think it is a super important topic, even if you are someone listening right now and you're like, I don't even know anybody with type 1 diabetes. You never know what could come in the future. I think it's just super important for us to all have knowledge about different topics and just kind of learn about what others go through in this world. And this is a very insightful episode on what others go through with type 1 diabetes. So definitely stick around if you do have type 1 diabetes. Thanks for joining in and thanks for listening. If you don't, still stick around. It is a good episode. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I am looking for supplements, I am looking for quality, I am looking for something to taste amazing, I am looking for all of that, but I am also looking at price. Is this supplement affordable? Am I able to get everything that I am wanting from this company, or am I going to need to shop at 5 different stores just to get what I want? That is not the case with MyProtein. MyProtein is a supplement company that has everything and anything, you guys. It even has gym clothes. You can get amazing looking gym clothes on MyProtein. Now, MyProtein is a supplement company that has great tasting supplements. It has great quality supplements and things that are extremely affordable. So again, if you are a student like me and you do not have hundreds of dollars to spend on supplements because things add up, definitely check out MyProtein. I love the My Vegan range at MyProtein. Being a plant-based and vegan athlete, I, of course, look for vegan supplements, and My Vegan range has anything and everything that I am looking for. It has all of the vitamins and minerals I am looking for. It has the protein I am looking for. If I am wanting BCAAs, it has it there. It also has so many snacks on there and so many food items on there. I can get a 5-pound, or is it 5 kilograms? I think it's even 5 kilograms of rolled oats, you guys, on MyProtein for dirty cheap. I can get natural peanut butter on MyProtein for dirty cheap. It is so amazing. So if you are looking for a supplement company that has anything and everything all in one place, then definitely head to the show notes, you guys, and click the link to shop at MyProtein. All right, welcome everybody. I'm sitting here with Owen. How are you going, Owen?
I'm great. Jordan, how are you?
Not bad, not bad. It's about 8:30 p.m. here in Australia. It's around my bedtime, so I'm up for this, which is a good thing. Yeah.
I apologize for keeping you awake so
Oh
late.
no,
It's
no worries.
8 minutes past 10 in Ireland right now. So as I
Yeah,
said, beautiful morning, which is strange to see frequently in Ireland. So
yeah.
it's a good start to the day.
Awesome. Now, Owen, do you mind maybe just getting started by letting us know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Eoin Costelloe. I am a type 1 diabetic from Ireland. I was diagnosed back in 2012. I am a diabetic personal trainer, diabetic coach, and I also have my own type 1 diabetic podcast called the Insulone Podcast, Redefining Diabetes. So the word insulone is obviously a play on insulin and my name, Owen.
Right.
A
Yeah.
lot of people don't get that, but that's what it is. So yeah, I suppose that's, I guess, why I'm on your podcast, Jordan, to talk about things like that. The fitness side of things, obviously, personal trainer, but that niche is type 1 diabetic. So that's the main thing, really.
Yeah, no. And that's true. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast was, of course, because of that fitness side of things, but also just diabetes in general. I think a lot of people, including myself, have definitely heard of the word diabetes, but maybe not necessarily understand what it actually is, and what people with diabetes kind of go through, especially with fitness, with health, and just with daily lives. So maybe do you mind getting started by telling us a little bit about what type 1 diabetes is? No need to get all scientific or anything like that. It can be as lay terms as you need, but yeah, maybe for the listeners out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try. I suppose I've spoken about this so many times.
Yeah.
I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. So there are various different types of diabetes. As you said, Jordan, you'll rarely find somebody who hasn't heard the word diabetes. Everybody knows that it exists, but not many people truly understand how intricate, how complex, how detailed it is to live with it. So, as I said, there are various different types of diabetes. The two most common are type 1, which is the one I have, and type 2, which is the one that people would generally associate with people being overweight, people being unhealthy, maybe not the best sort of lifestyle, those kind of things. But because we're specifically talking about type 1, that's the one I have. And the best way to describe it is basically my pancreas stopped working.
Right.
Okay. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Essentially, my body started attacking itself and my pancreas just stopped working. For whatever reason it happened, completely random. They don't know definitively why it occurs, but it's just kind of bad luck in a sense. So the best way to describe it is I have to manually regulate my blood sugar externally, whereas you will automatically regulate your blood sugar internally with your pancreas. So
Right.
to use the example of, if you were to eat a chocolate bar, you would eat that chocolate bar, your body would break it down, you would release that as glucose into your bloodstream, and then your pancreas would automatically secrete insulin, which is the hormone, to counteract the glucose to essentially keep your blood sugar stable.
Right.
Okay. Whereas if I eat a chocolate bar, or any other type 1 diabetic eats a chocolate bar, I'll eat it. I'll manually inject insulin. The chocolate will be released as glucose into my bloodstream. And hopefully that insulin will be enough, or not too much, to counteract that glucose to keep my blood sugar stable. So insulin essentially works as a key to unlock your body's cells so that glucose can go into the cell and be used as energy. Now, if I take too much insulin, my blood sugar will drop, and that's hypoglycemia. If I take too little insulin, my blood sugar will spike as a result of the food, and that's called hyperglycemia. So I will often describe living with type 1 diabetes as if you're constantly living your life on a balancing board,
Right.
24 hours a day. Even I'm speaking to you right now, I'm
Yeah.
thinking, is my blood sugar, because I just went for a run and I'm like, is my blood sugar on the way down? Is my blood sugar high? So that's a relatively simplistic way to explain it. But essentially it's, I have to externally regulate my blood sugar with insulin.
Right. Now, that's something, because I remember you stated a little bit earlier that you got diagnosed in 2012. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So essentially, was there any changes that you needed to immediately kind of take at that time? Because I mean, this is all like, that was an awesome definition, but like to me, that's just like so stressful. You know what I mean? Like always needing to worry
Yeah.
and
Tell me
need to
about it.
think about that. So I can't even imagine what people with type 1 diabetes go through. So was there anything that you kind of needed to change right at that kind of point where you first learned about this diagnosis, that you kind of was like, oh shit, I need to kind of fix these kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Type 1 diabetes, when you're diagnosed, is almost like the flick of a switch.
Uh,
It happens quite rapidly. So I lost about 1.5 stone in about 3 weeks. I was really gaunt in the face. I was really, really, really thirsty. I had this unquenchable thirst. I was pissing every half an hour because I was drinking
yeah.
so much water. No energy, no appetite. Basically, was diagnosed one day you go into hospital, you're told you're type 1 diabetic, and from that moment on, you have to take insulin for the rest of your life. That's the way it is. So that's the first kind of drastic, immediate change that occurs. Is I was a quote unquote normal 19-year-old, fit, healthy, going out with friends, all these kind of things, as I still do. But when I went into hospital, I was told you're type 1 diabetic. And from that moment on, I've had to inject insulin anywhere from 6 to 10 times a day. And I will have to do that for the rest of my life. So, yeah, that was the first immediate change. Of course, things come along with that will benefit you in terms of, am I exercising frequently? Am I doing the right type of exercise? Am I educating myself around the condition? And I always say to people, and particularly clients who I work with, I say, type 1 diabetes is a condition where it's not like you break your leg and you go into hospital, you're given a cast or you're given a few pills or whatever it is, and it's like, come back in 6 months and you'll be fine. Type 1 diabetes is a constant 24 hours, 7 days a week job. And on average, we make an additional 180 to 320 decisions every single day based on food, exercise, stress, sleep, monitoring blood sugars, all these kind of things. So I always say to people, the vast majority of our health and the vast majority of the responsibility of the condition comes down to you. This isn't a condition where you can rely on somebody else. Of course, family, friends, spouses, whatever, have your best interest at heart. But the reality of it is, you will be seeing your endocrinologist or your doctor or your diabetic team for a few hours a year. You might have a 3-month or a 6-month checkup. All the other thousands of hours, it's just you.
Yeah.
So if you don't understand the condition, if you don't understand your own body, if you don't educate yourself and realize the impacts that stress, exercise, food, sleep, insulin can all have, you're doing yourself an injustice in a way.
Right. And when did fitness and you working on kind of your health and fitness play a role in this kind of diagnosis? Were you active in all that before, or was it something that you needed to start doing after the diagnosis?
I think I was lucky because for my whole life, I was always into sport. I was, playing football, I was running, I was going to the gym, these kind of things. So because I was already in such a good routine with that, and it's something that I loved so much, and I still do love so much, keeping myself fit and being active, that almost put me at an advantage, because inevitably, like most things in your life, exercise and increased activity is going to benefit you. And it's no different with type 1 diabetes. So obviously I had to change my routines in terms of how I exercise, my preparation before, during, and after exercise, because all these things are a lot more complicated and detailed when you have to monitor your blood sugar. But I quickly realized the massive benefit that exercise has, and particularly weight training or resistance training. So I was diagnosed at 19. I think that year I had just kind of got into consistently weight training. And then diagnosed, after diagnosis, I tried to get back into that as quickly as possible. So because I enjoyed resistance training and weight training, and still do, it put me at a great advantage, because it wasn't like, I know this is going to benefit my blood sugar, but it's a chore for me to do. For me, it's, I know exercise is going to benefit my blood sugar and I love doing it, So that's, I suppose it put me at an advantage from the start. With diabetes, it's almost a non-negotiable that you're active. You don't have to pump the gym 6 days a week. You don't have to go out and do sprints or run marathons, whatever people might tell you to do. It's all about just being active. It could be going out on your bike, playing tennis, playing football, walking, whatever it is. Just get your body moving. That's the way it is, really.
And that's interesting to me, because you were at advantage, of course, because you were fit prior to this, but there's a lot of people that, of course, aren't in that position or refuse to go to the gym or this and that. And a lot of people don't realize that fitness is a lot more than just building muscle, this or that, like it does affect your blood sugar and this. So I think people with type 1 diabetes may look at it a little bit different. You may look at it a little bit different than someone like me who doesn't have type 1 diabetes. So maybe if you don't mind getting into, of course, everything's probably going to be from your personal point of view. But how does fitness and being active help people with diabetes?
So there are different types of, obviously, the two main types of exercise are going to be anaerobic and aerobic. So they will both have very different impacts on your blood sugar. Long term and even short to medium term, like in relation to maybe a week or a month, they will benefit. But they can be difficult and sometimes daunting for people to get started with, because you might see your blood sugar skyrocket or you might see your blood sugar plummet. And for us, and anyone listening who has type 1 diabetes, the last thing in the world you want is your blood sugar to skyrocket or your blood sugar to drop, because it's a horrible feeling. So with exercise, I'll talk about resistance training particularly. So resistance training, in my opinion, is the number one way to help naturally regulate your blood sugar. Now, that's the case because essentially when you are training, like if you're doing push-ups, squats, deadlifts, pull-ups, all these kind of things, if you build a larger muscle mass, and I don't mean muscle mass as in you need to walk around like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but just working them more frequently and maybe building them up more than you have. So our glucose is going to be stored in muscle fiber and our liver. So if you have a larger muscle mass, essentially, in simpler terms, your muscle mass will work almost like a sponge. So if I have excess glucose in my system and my blood sugar is maybe inclined to be slightly higher, because I have a slightly higher muscle mass and because I'm frequently exercising, it's almost like it will work as a sponge, absorb that excess blood or excess glucose and take it out of my bloodstream. So it kind of helps naturally regulate my blood sugar.
Right.
Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, that makes a lot
Okay.
of sense. Yeah. Because I think it makes a lot of sense because of course, if you're in the fitness industry, if you're in health science, for example, you definitely know blood glucose levels and you know how resistance training and I mean, let's do the bro science here. And a lot of people after they work out, they immediately eat those high sugars to get those glycogen in their muscles. So I think that's a very good descriptor of how, when you're working out, all of that excess glucose will kind of be absorbed by that muscle tissue. And I think it's important to remember that lifting heavy doesn't always necessarily mean you're going to walk around like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like it's resistance training is an important thing. You're not going to get bulky all the time, but is it, or have you found it hard, let's say, for people listening who may have type 1 diabetes, or even personal trainers out there who have clients with type 1 diabetes? Is it harder for people with type 1 diabetes to build muscle or to bodybuild, let's say?
Essentially, yes. Like everything is going to be hard. Like this, in no way sympathetic towards diabetics at
Yeah.
all, but everything is going to be harder with type 1 diabetes because everything comes after us monitoring our blood sugar. So if our blood sugar isn't within range, it's either going to be high or it's going to be low. Now, if it's low, we have a very, very short space of time to treat that low before we pass out and potentially go into a coma. It could be 20, 30 minutes. So if our blood sugar is low, we're consuming more calories to bring our blood sugar back up. We're eating glucose to bring it back up. So if you are somebody who's trying to lose weight or burn some fat and you're consistently exercising, and as a result of the exercise, your blood sugar keeps dropping, and then after it drops, you have to consume additional calories to bring your blood sugar back up. So it can be very frustrating that way. And then the other side of that is if, let's say, for example, you're trying to build muscle, if your blood sugar is consistently high, your body isn't working efficiently. Your body is almost eating at itself because, like I said earlier, it doesn't have enough insulin to open up the cells to use the food as energy. So therefore it eats at our own body in a simple way. So the same fundamentals apply in relation to somebody with diabetes trying to build muscle. Progressive overload, sufficient protein, calories, rest, consistency, patience, all these things that everybody needs to have if they want to build muscle or get in shape or change their body composition at all. But it's just that additional complicated layer to try and externally manual or regulate your blood sugar. But it's not impossible. It's just, as I said earlier, again, Jordan, it's about educating yourself. It's about understanding your body and how you react to certain types of exercise, how you react to certain types of food, how much insulin you need, all these kind of things.
Right. And where can, let's say somebody out there is a personal trainer or a professional working with someone with type 1 diabetes, is there any resources that you recommend them going to look at to kind of help their clients a little bit further? Because I really like that. Like, it's all about education, I think. Someone like me, for example, I mean, I don't personal train anymore, but I have in the past. And if I had someone come to me with type 1 diabetes wanting to gain muscle, let's say, I would have no idea about any of this. So are there any resources out there for professionals out there?
The number one resource would be my podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
that will be in the show notes below, everyone.
Because I do talk about muscle building and getting in shape and stuff a lot on it. But a couple of books that I would definitely recommend, even to just get an idea of how complex and intricate it can be. There's a book called Think Like a Pancreas. So that's kind of an overview of what type 1 diabetes is and how to try and treat it with insulin.
Right.
And then specifically in terms of training and muscle building, there's a book called Diabetic Muscle and Fitness Guide by Phil Graham. So pretty big books, but if somebody was genuinely interested in finding out more about it, they're a great resource, easy to read, and a lot of info in there. What I'd say to people, and if there are any personal trainers listening, which I'm sure there are, one thing I'd say is don't underestimate how complicated type 1 diabetes is. Because I get a lot of clients that reach out to me who say, yeah, obviously I'm type 1 diabetic and I've worked with a personal trainer in the past, but he or she didn't understand type 1 diabetes. And that can almost be slightly dangerous, because if you don't differentiate specifically between type 1 and type 2, if you're training somebody, which a lot of people don't, you run the risk of blood sugar dropping very, very low as a result of a meal plan or exercise you're giving them, or the other side of that, blood sugar running very, very, very high as a result of a meal plan or exercise you're giving them. So if somebody does come to you and they're type 1, just be sure to be sure you know that they're fully comfortable in terms of food they're eating, exercise they're doing, because it can potentially be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, education is key. And I think, I mean, just from what I've gathered thus far, it's definitely something that, somebody who is, let's say, someone like me, without type 1 diabetes wanting to gain muscle, for example. Yes, sometimes people who bodybuild, for example, can be obsessive, but in your case, you kind of need to be a little bit obsessive about that. So I think if you're a personal trainer working out there, or just general people that are listening to this podcast wanting to know about type 1 diabetes, it's good to know that, or it's important to know that, you need to be a little bit obsessive about this, and you need to kind of pay attention to these things. But one thing that kind of it wasn't mentioned a little bit, but it struck a little bit of a idea, was supplementation. Do you need to be worried, or do you have you ever had to watch about supplements before because of added sugars and this and that? Is there kind of things that you've had to look out for in the past, or do you not use supplementation at all?
Yeah, it's always an additional thought that you have, and it may be not a concern, but something that you need to be aware of if you're reaching out for any type of supplement, whatever you might be going for. Generally, well, quite commonly, there might be added sugars or artificial sugars that inevitably will spike your blood sugar. So It's not too much of a concern because particularly nowadays, there's so many different types of supplements. There's so many different brands that promote, no added sugar, no artificial sugars, all these kind of things. So as long as you're not kind of stupid about it, you'd be fine. Some pre-workouts you might have to be a bit cautious of because they might be inclined to have large amounts of sugar, or intra workouts like liquid carbs and all these kind of things could obviously just skyrocket your bloods. But for the most part, a simple whey protein, say creatine, if it's just creatine monohydrate with no added sugar, again, you shouldn't have any issues. I have taken a whey protein shake for a while now and creatine for a while now, no issues. But again, it's one of those things, and what I always say is all type 1 diabetes is the same. There's no varied severity of type 1. There's no different types of type 1. It's all the same. But because everybody's body's different, because everybody's lifestyle is different, no type 1 diabetic is the same. So I might have the same condition as you, Jordan. Let's say you're type 1 diabetic too. We both have the same goal of keeping our blood sugar stable. But because you might live a certain lifestyle, I might live a certain lifestyle, our bodies are completely different. We may manage it a different way. Different types of insulin, different types of food, exercise, stress management, all these kind of things. So again, it's important you understand what your body needs rather than basing it off somebody else, because there's no blueprint to living with type 1 diabetes. It's trial and error, trial and error, trial and error.
Right. So now somebody who is wanting to start, let's say, being more active, somebody who may be newly diagnosed and is wanting to start resistance training or wanting to start going to the gym or something along those lines, where do you recommend somebody like that starting? Because again, there's a lot, from what I've gathered, there's a lot to think about. So where does somebody who has type 1 diabetes and is wanting to start their fitness journey, where do you recommend them starting, or where did you start, let's say?
Well, it depends on what somebody's goal is. If somebody specifically really wants to put on muscle, as I said, the fundamentals are going to be the same. You're going to need to lift weight. You're going to need to be lifting progressively heavier, eating calories, protein, all these sorts of things. It can be different for each person, but start easy. Start easy. And using myself as an example, I kind of knew what I was doing in the gym already. So as I said before, I was at an advantage, let's say. But it's completely different going in there with type 1 diabetes. So I didn't start by pumping the gym 6 days a week. I started by going maybe 2 or 3 times. Started with, I always try and stick to compound movements. So bench, squats, deadlifts.
Yeah.
I continued to do that.
That's come up a lot of times on this podcast, people. Stick to those.
Big time. Like, not even if you want to build muscle, even if you want to burn
just
fat,
in general,
squats, bench, deadlifts, they are just the kings.
Yeah.
The king exercises.
I agree. Yeah.
So the most important thing always is monitoring your blood sugar. And I apologize for somebody listening who doesn't have diabetes. They're probably like, well, this chap shut up talking about monitoring blood sugar. But that's the most important thing. You're not going to lose weight. You're not going to build muscle if your blood sugar isn't managed well. And when you lift weights, when you lift heavy weights, you may see your blood sugar react a certain way compared to if you're just sitting in watching TV. So when I say start small, go to the gym once, twice, 3 times a week, monitor your blood sugar more than you want. So you can see, okay, my blood sugar is dropping when I go for a run. My blood sugar is spiking when I'm doing squats. It's staying stable when I do this.
Right.
So it's like the more you regulate or the more you check your blood sugar, the more you learn about your diabetes.
Right.
Because you're seeing, okay, this is happening as a result of this. This is happening as a result of this. And you're not going into it blind then the next time.
Right.
So I always want people to, without being too obsessive about it, just analyze your blood sugar all the time. Because when something happens, there's a reason to it.
Right.
There's a reason your blood sugar spiked. There's a reason your blood sugar dropped. When you understand why that happened, you're more likely to avoid it from happening as frequently in the future. Much like everything in your life.
Yeah.
You know, if something is going well, there's a reason
I was
behind it. If
just
something
thinking
isn't
that.
going so
Yeah.
well, yeah. So I'm trying to relate this
Yeah.
to the general public too. But no, that's the biggest thing. It's constantly analyzing, constantly being aware of, why is this happening? Why is my blood sugar spiking? Why is my blood sugar dropping? And that's the most important thing, exercise wise, for a type 1, because if you don't prepare in a good way, if you don't, let's say for example, today, right? Perfect example is today. Okay. So I knew this podcast was at 10 a.m. I got up this morning and I wanted to go for a run.
Right.
I woke up, my blood sugar was exactly where I wanted it to be. Okay. So my blood sugar ideally should be between 4 and 8 millimoles per liter.
Okay.
So if I was to check your blood sugar, Jordan, it would be between 4 and 8.
Before and 8. Okay.
Just to put it into perspective, when I was diagnosed, my blood sugar was like 38.
Oh, wow.
So they told me I was less than 48 hours away from a coma.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was mad. But today, woke up, blood's perfect. But because I wanted to go for a run, I needed to plan for that in advance. If I had have just gone out for a run where my blood sugar was, my blood sugar would have dropped within maybe half an hour.
Right.
And then I'd be treating a low blood sugar, eating more calories, trying to bring it back up.
Okay.
Because I'm kind of anticipating what's happening, I had to eat a couple biscuits before my run, let my blood sugar come back up, so that when my blood sugar naturally comes down as a result of the exercise, I hopefully won't go too low into a low blood sugar state. So it's about anticipating what's happening in the future so that you can plan in advance.
Right.
Because, as I said, if I had just gone for a run without eating any biscuits beforehand, my blood sugar would have dropped. I would have been all over the place and probably would have been late for the podcast.
Yeah.
You know?
Glad that didn't happen.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just about understanding the effects of different exercises,
and definitely being proactive from what I've gathered. And I think that's like, it's even, again, going back to the general public or the personal trainers that are working with people with type 1 diabetes, it's very good to know all of this, because you definitely, before this whole entire episode thus far, had no idea how proactive people with type 1 diabetes had to be. The things that you kind of had to look at and plan throughout the day. Because I think it can be hard. Me looking at myself right now, I'm like, I could never do that. But I think when you have type 1 diabetes, you don't have a choice, right? You kind of have to. You kind of have to.
The only alternative is dying.
Yeah,
Jordan.
exactly.
So you do it.
I'd have to. Yeah, I'd be for a rude awakening for sure. But where can people work with you? So, do you have a website? Do you have a place that people can kind of chat with you if they have any questions? I know, definitely speak about your podcast, because you have that out, and 52 episodes as of now. So a lot of resources.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to find out more about me, they can go onto my website, which is insuleoin.com. So it's insuleoin.com. Social media primarily is Instagram, so at insuleoin, the same. And then the podcast itself is available anywhere. The Insuleoin Podcast, Redefining Diabetes. So if there is somebody listening now who is a type 1 diabetic and wants to find out more, don't hesitate to reach out. If there is a personal trainer who is interested or has been training type 1 diabetic clients, don't hesitate to reach out. Or if there's somebody who's like brother or girlfriend or boyfriend has type 1 diabetes, don't hesitate to reach out, because they're, strangely enough, I get a lot of boyfriends or girlfriends who reach out even just through Instagram to say, you know, my boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is has type 1 diabetes. What can I do to help?
Yeah.
You know, because it, as much as somebody can have a type 1 diabetic's best interest at heart, which is great, you never really truly understand the detail of it.
Yeah.
you know. So just try and learn more about it. Like most things, the more you know about something, essentially, the more you can offer to help,
Yeah.
which is always a good thing.
And to all you listeners that don't have type 1 diabetes, don't know anybody, that are still listening right now, good on you. Because
Yeah.
it's good to know. It's good to just, I mean, I don't know anybody with type 1 diabetes, but I think it's just a good thing to know. You know what I mean? Like, there are people out there that have so many various things and are going through so much. And it's just kind of nice to know what other people are going through sometimes and how to help if you need be, because you never know what happens. You never know. So
Yeah, of course.
yeah.
And I think, sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I think one of the main positives I took from getting diagnosed is the fact that I kind of have a new appreciation for my health.
Right.
And I know that's a strange thing to say because I have been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but it's like I went from a quote unquote healthy, fit 19-year-old with not really anything to worry about so much to the next day being told I have to inject myself every time or like multiple times a day. And I think because of that, I realized how fragile your health can be.
Right.
It's like, boom,
Yeah.
something big can happen quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you aren't diabetic, even if you don't have something like that to deal with, realize that you should appreciate your health big time. And I know it's such a cliche thing to say, but it's true. It's like when I noticed that, it's just boom, like that massive change.
Massive,
You appreciate then your family's health, your friends' health, all these kind of things. So it's important that you take a positive out of whatever it is you're doing. So if you're not diabetic, appreciate the fact that you're not diabetic.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Eoin, for being on the podcast. I think that was great detail. And I think for people like me too, who need things to be very simple, that was awesome there. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Great, everyone. That is it for today's episode. I don't even really have anything to say at the end of it other than thank you all for listening. Thank you all for sticking around, especially the people who have been listening who are like me and don't really know anybody with type 1 diabetes. Once again, I think I said this during the episode, I just think it's good for us all to kind of be more educated in what other people are kind of going through, such as type 1 diabetes, because again, all of this, I had no clue that people with type 1 diabetes had to go through all of this, had to pay attention to all of this. So I know even me as a healthcare practitioner, as a physiotherapist in the future, these are all things that I can use in my practice, as well as just, who knows, maybe I'll have a friend in the future that I meet and has type 1 diabetes. Now I know a little bit more. So yeah, thank you all for listening to today's episode, and I will talk to you all next week.